Hello, and welcome to M4LU, presented by Moms for Liberty. We're here to translate complex topics into more easily understood content, giving you, the parents, grandparents, and every American citizen, the key facts and information you need to empower you to fight back against government overreach, especially as it impacts our kids in schools. Hi, I'm Missy Karwowski, Program Director of M4LU. Each month, we'll focus on a single topic, ideology, or issue that impacts our kids, schools, and communities. We'll approach it from multiple angles, starting with a 101 intro lecture, followed by a 102 course that goes a little deeper on the topic. If available, we'll do a virtual watch party of a film relating to the topic, and finally culminate with a monthly book club discussion. Best of all, every event will have live Q&A with experts in the field to help us make sense of it all. We understand this can be a lot to digest, but don't worry, we've got your back. You'll find a corresponding toolkit in the resource library at m4lu.org. In addition to recordings of all monthly events, each toolkit will include a curated smart book, presentation slides that can be used at chapter meetings, related white papers, articles, podcasts, and so much more. Now, before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. Depending on what device you are using, there should be an audience chat and Q&A feature at the right of your screen. Please comment, interact with your fellow audience members, and be sure to submit those questions to our amazing guests. It is so valuable to get this direct interaction with them, so please take advantage of it. As a warning, rude or demeaning comments will get you removed from this event, and you will not be permitted to re-enter. Now, of course, the legal reminder that the opinions of the guests and any media content shared are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of M4LU or Moms for Liberty. Thank you so much for joining us today. Please like, share, and subscribe to help spread the word and support our mission. We try to keep our resources affordable and accessible to all, but if you would like to donate, please visit m4lu.org. Thank you again. Now let's jump over to the event. Hello, joyful warriors, friends, and family. We are so thankful to have you here with us as we wrap up the final event in our month-long focus on gender ideology. Now, I've said it before, but I really do mean it. This was the topic that truly was my red pill and sent me down the rabbit hole trying to understand what was happening in society. So I was genuinely looking forward, possibly more than any of the other topics we've had, to just be able to share this with all of you. This documentary is absolutely compelling, and I'm so excited to share it with you today. A cautionary note, though, the topic is sensitive and addressed very frank and caring and compassionate. But please know that this and the dialogue is not necessarily always the easiest way to introduce it to someone you know who might be already down the path of questioning or wondering. So please just consider that very, very thoughtfully and know that this is intended to be informational and to help equip you in your conversations as well. I hope you enjoyed this film. I know I found it just incredibly compelling, fascinating, and so important. The topic is addressed so well, so compassionate, and just so much information is included here. There's tons of resources that are referenced all throughout. I'm sure you saw that. It's absolutely incredible. And on the website for the film, there is a toolkit, full list of all of the resources that they cite. So I'll make sure that we have that linked in the show notes as well. Um, Now I am very excited to bring on our guests who will be joining us as we're wrapping everything up today. So the first person that we'll be bringing is Joey Brite. She's a trailblazer of the American feminist movement and came out as a lesbian at 16 in 1971, embracing her gender nonconforming identity as the rebellious daughter of an immigrant Latina mother. Inspired by cinema and photo format magazines like Life and Look, she picked up a camera at 12, documenting daily life, art, and politics. Bright's passion for community organizing and event production flourished in the vibrant lesbian community of the 1970s, which later faced challenges from big pharma and gender ideology. In 2021, driven by the alarming agenda to disconnect youth from their natural bodies, Brite spearheaded nationwide protests at gender clinics. In 2022, she collaborated with a concerned mother on a documentary exposing the medical scandal affecting young detransitioners, which you just watched, leading to the creation of Affirmation Generation, which was later renamed No Way Back. Please help me welcome Joey Brite. There we go. We're good.
Okay, thank you
So
for
good to have you here.
yeah, thanks for inviting me. I feel very honored about this and to be with Stephanie Winn as well.
Absolutely, which is our next guest. So Stephanie Winn is a licensed marriage and family therapist, host of the podcast You Must Be Some Kind of Therapist, and creator of the ROGD repair course and community for parents. She served as associate producer on this film, No Way Back: The Reality of Gender Affirming Care. Welcome, Stephanie Wynn.
Hi, Missy. Thanks for having us. Great to be here.
It is I'm so thrilled to have you both here. This movie was so moving for me. I watched quite a few documentaries as part of the screening to pick the one that we would be featuring this month, and I was genuinely thrilled to be able to feature this. I think you both have such an interesting story and background, and you address so many good topics in here. So before we do anything else, I'd love to hear. I know I've researched both of your backgrounds, but I'd love if you could share a little bit of your background and what compelled you to jump into this film.
Want to go ahead,
Joey
Stephanie?
or Stephanie?
Go ahead, Joey.
Um, what compelled me? Let's see, getting the invitation and meeting the mom who is the producer of the film. Uh, but it was the background of watching, as you maybe remember from the documentary, noticing a pattern of years. I'm talking about kind of like the late 80s and then right to the beginning of the 90s, and by mid 90s really this idea of a lesbian culture that had been thriving and developing for a number of years, the sort of second wave of feminism, and it was disappearing. It was absolutely disappearing, and I found my voice and only a few other lesbians who were willing to question what was going on, especially when we were being hit up. And this is prior to the internet existing, having friends seeing them at the bookstores or a concert or the bars or something and asking for small donations. Like it was usually no more than $20, but for some friend who was going to go off to UCSF to get her breasts removed. But they didn't call it that. They wouldn't even use the phrase double mastectomies, which is what it was. They'd say, my friend wants to get top surgery. And I was like, why is everybody getting top surgeries all of a sudden? And then I was immediately put into this kind of, you know, the same thing that happens with silencing around everything, the same thing that Dr. Julia Mason brought up. If you question anything, if you ask or even hint at what is going on, I said, why do we don't have women's studies anymore? It's called gender studies. This started happening in San Francisco. I wasn't even involved in those classes, but I had a lot of friends. And so it was the language. I saw the shutting down of conversations. I saw our community again disappearing, and these new, which became a Trojan horse, these new images in all of the gay and lesbian magazines. Everything was changing, and we were supposed to start questioning and wondering whether maybe we were really trapped in the wrong body. And I was like, that has nothing to do with, sexual orientation. So it was back then in questioning and already being othered by a community that's already othered. I was being othered, as were a very small group of us. And yeah, so I've been carrying that around for a long time and talking about it. So
I didn't
when
realize there was quite such a history, frankly. I didn't realize it went, I mean, I feel like I should have known that, but I didn't realize how far back this went.
Oh, and even further back than what I'm talking about. I mean, now a lot of people understand. They go back to John Money and the
Yeah.
1950s and, all that stuff. But really, anybody that was hanging around with gays and lesbians during a time when there was a lot of art and culture that was starting to shift and change, we were feeling it in very personal ways. But yeah, the general culture wouldn't have known about it. So if you had if you had friends, close friends, they might say, wow, I went to the bar tonight or something, and all these guys were starting to come in, saying that they were lesbians or they were wearing skirts or wigs or, whatever, coming into the women's, it was typically like women's cultural space. So the general public wouldn't know about that. And really, I mean, with the internet, by 1995, what we hear Laura Becker, detransitioners Laura Becker talk about, and Michelle, and we see that guy Joel talking about being online, and he even used the word, he said, I became an influencer. He was one of those that
Mhm.
came kind of after those two young women. Um, so
So,
yeah, the internet really
and
affected everything.
I would say, Stephanie, is that how you got kind of pulled into this?
Well, similar to what Joey said with the cultural shift that she observed in the lesbian community, I experienced a similar cultural shift in the professional mental health community
Mhm.
from a place of just a lot more ease and open dialogue to this really adamant, ideologically rigid silencing of dissent between 2010 and 2020 or so.
Mhm.
I also witnessed that exponential rise in the number of young people with gender related distress, and I was seeing them in my office more and more. All the things we talk about in gender critical community, I was seeing in my office, the kids with the autistic traits that haven't been diagnosed yet, the gay kids, the quirky kids, the kids with the sexual abuse and other trauma history. I was seeing all that kind of stuff, and I was seeing them turning towards trans. But it wasn't until 2020 that I learned about detransitioners. I was taught to affirm gender at a training in 2017, and I went along with it because I thought of myself as this progressive, open-minded therapist. So it was really kind of seeing all of this with my own eyes and not really having the language for it. And then hearing about detransitioners, I just got so curious, started putting two and two together, allowed myself to tap into my intuition again and trust common sense that, of course, you're messing with young people's endocrine systems during a vulnerable stage of identity development. Of course, this is a mess.
Well, I'm glad that you did because I personally have gone really enjoyed your podcast. I
Thank you.
spent quite a while on that channel. You have some great guests, and I have a couple questions actually that I want to bring up later. But one of the most interesting things about the actually think it's a really important is that right at the end, it's stated that it's produced and created by all lifelong West Coast Democrats, which puts this. And the reason I think that's so important is because too often we're in this sad state where questioning any sort of questioning of gender ideology is labeled as right wing bigotry or hatred or conspiracy. And so I'm personally thrilled that we can as a community in a world that is more divided than ever, it feels, be able to connect with our fellow humans on really important topics. One thing that I was interested about was, or I thought was really well said, right at the end or near the end, Lisa Davis essentially had kind of a call to action to everyone, left and right. To make space for gender diversity, so more masculine girls and more feminine boys, which almost to me sounds like an anti-bullying campaign. And I don't mean that in a bad way, and I'm not trying to put words into her mouth. But I wonder, that feels like it might have been the beginning of or like tagged on to the transgender movements, like pushing supporting gender affirming care or therapy was supposed to be anti-bullying. So how do we make that space for these very real differences without going to extremes?
Well, if I can add something here, and Joey has such a bigger perspective on this because she's been around for so long to witness all the cultural changes. But from what I've seen, from my limited vantage point, it seems like this idea that's prevalent in gender critical communities that it's the gay and lesbian, so-called gender non-conforming, or as I prefer to say, gender atypical, because I think that terminology is a little more neutral. That it's those kids getting swept up in this. I feel like that was a lot more true 10 or 15 years ago. I feel like right now it's everyone. It is the gender typical kids, the girly girls, the boyish boys, like everyone's getting caught up in it. So that's my perspective on this matter. I don't
Mhm.
know if Joey has anything to add.
No, absolutely. I agree with you. The thing is that I I'd said this before. I saw this as an attack, I thought, somebody's attacking the lesbian community. They're wanting to take us down the way that gay men, had contracted this horrible virus and all this. I had no clue that this was ever going to go because I didn't know about the internet until later. And then realizing they're going after every kid, they're going after every youth. They're attracting through this social contagion, mechanism, and with a very top down from the government. Again, when the language started to erase women, like again, women's studies became gender studies, lesbian and gay became queer, but straight people could be queer, which meant the erasure of what that even was gone. So I got lost with the I agree with you, Stephanie. That is exactly it. It was something that I never thought they were going to go after heterosexuals at all. I didn't know it would become that kind of a thing because I didn't have the realization that the producer, I want to say, when I was approached by the producer, she was inspired to do this documentary because of the work of Jennifer Billick. Why? Because Jennifer Billick threw all this stuff aside and said, this is like never been about gender. This is about control. This is about our entire society. It's about the commodification of bodies. And we could see that with what all the detransitioners talked about. First you start to get brainwashed or you go into this cult or this religion. You think you have to get medicalized. You're going to have to physically change your genitals. I mean, it's like what Stephanie was saying. I love that the part in the film where she does that, you know, what is it, Stephanie, you said about what's next, or
Yeah, well, it's part of what makes this ideology so dangerous is that it's an untested hypothesis that youth are going off of. In other words, those of us with matured prefrontal cortexes, as Laura Becker mentions in the film, we can make fairly accurate predictions about what's going to make us feel better or worse based on repetition of, hundreds or thousands of times. In other words, I'm cranky now, but I just need a good meal and a good shower or a
mm,
hug or a run or things like this. Why do we know that? It's because we've done it before. That's how we learn to regulate our emotions. But youth are going down this dangerous obsessive compulsive type pattern of thinking where they're miserable and their thoughts and actions and behaviors are reinforcing their misery, their anxiety, their distress, their fixation. But they're telling themselves a story that in the future, I will feel markedly different. That
mhm,
story doesn't reflect what we know about how the brain actually works. We don't, what we know about neuroplasticity and, making progress in a direction of mental health. It's more, I'm going to have this complete transformation, even though I'm in this really bad state now, once I fix my body. And then, of course, they're disappointed after the euphoria, right? And there is that placebo effect, but they go through that crash because their brain hasn't changed. Their brain has been practicing these obsessive, compulsive, depressive, neurotic thought patterns thousands of times. So, yeah, it's that dangling carrot, the hypothesis they haven't tested that when I do this thing that's never happened to me before, and by definition can only happen one time, for example, like a mastectomy, it can only happen to you once and then you can't go back, that I will feel better. And unfortunately, it's not true. But then, as some of the other people in the film point out, the dysphoria moves around. So instead of realizing, oh, that was the problem the whole time, and I just did something I regret, it's more like, well, now I got to fix my hips, my voice, my height, whatever.
I think that's so understandable, really. For me, I can relate to that in the idea, not that I've ever had that direct thought process, but it's very easy to say, for example, I'll be happy when I have this, or I'll be happy when I move to that neighborhood, or I'll be happy when I get that job. So it's an understandable concept. Is that this, or at least that's what it sounds like to me. Am I correctly understanding you that that's kind of the same thought process that the that kids are having?
I think that is a lot of it. I mean, so my work now, like since the film, I've shifted entirely to parent coaching because there's just such a need for help learning how to communicate with these kids. There's a lot of forces working against you. You can't just reason with these kids. You can't just show them a documentary like No Way Back, right? It's a tricky psychological state that they're in. And so I hear a lot of reports from the parents of what the kids say and what that reveals about their thought process. And I think that, these naive beliefs about how their mental state will change in the future are really a big part of it.
Think you were saying that it's similar. You said you were starting to focus on parents because there's such a need to help parents.
Oh,
So I
yeah,
don't want
that's
to make you reiterate it.
sure. I mean, it's just all I do besides my podcast these days is, educate and coach parents in communicating with these kids. And I was just, yeah, affirming that the mindset is a huge piece.
So I'm speaking of mindset. I'm curious. I heard you talk about this idea, and Joey would love to get your thoughts on this too. I think this was so interesting. You talked about. I think it was one of your guests was named Yakov. Uh, Presented the concept of symbolic equivalence, which I
I
thought
love that
that
episode.
combined with it was
Yeah.
great. That was so informative. And that when you combine that with the autistic that we're seeing an increase in
Yeah.
identifying autism on this as well. Can you just speak to that a little
Yeah,
bit? Because
I love that
that
you asked
seems
that
like it's a
question, Missy, and
huge
this is
factor.
not in the documentary, so this is more kinda psychology nerd stuff here, but for those who are just hearing about this, Missy's referring to an episode of my podcast that aired in December of 2024 with Jaco von Sale. He is a brilliant, psychotherapist, and, I don't have a pen nearby. Usually, I use a pen as an example of this, but we'll just pretend my cell phone is a pen, okay? So, so the example that Yako gives of symbolic equivalence is suppose this is a pen and I go, I hate this pen. And why do I hate this pen? Well, it's my father gave it to me and I have issues with my father, right?
Mhm.
That's the real issue. But do I equivocate? And do I have insight into the symbolism here? Or do I really just think that this pen is the thing I hate? No, it's just an inanimate object. Who cares about it, right? The thing I hate is my father. But it takes a certain maturity to differentiate, to realize, wow, when I look at that pen, I feel all angry inside. And that just reminds me how I feel about my father.
Mhm.
So Yako is talking about a function of psychological maturity that not everyone has, and that's going to be delayed if it ever shows up in people with autistic black and white thinking. And this is a huge part of gender identity ideation because swap out pen for body part, right? I hate this. And I've seen cases of that in the families I've talked to where sometimes there's something very clear in that person's history. Sexual assault can be one, adoption is another. Like so for girls who were adopted at birth, for example, they were never breastfed, and imagine, how the feelings of having missed out on that sort of primordial experience of merging with the mother as an infant could show up later in life as this symbolic equivalent style of hatred of the breasts that is treated in this very concrete way, treated at face value like it is what it is, rather than this is something that, is a psychological issue. And these youth are really that's a problem with gender affirming care. They are affirmed in their belief that this body part is the source of the distress and that they can solve it by removing it.
Mhm.
That was so interesting to me, and when I felt like it just totally made sense with everything that is addressed in the film, when there's that each person is interviewed and that list builds along the side of the
Mhm.
screen of
Mhm.
all of these oh my gosh, I can't speak. Comorbidities of issues that it's just incredible. That was really eye-opening for me. So thank you for sharing that.
Mhm.
Okay, I think we've already gone further than I intended to because I could talk to you both all day. So I'm going to ask our lovely moderators to bring up our first question. I see a number of really good ones in the chat here. Okay, so from Rebecca, what can I do living in a state that is doubling down on the lies regarding affirming care? And I'm going to follow up with one that she has right after this because it's kind of a second to it. The state and school boards are continuing to promote it no matter what. So will lawsuits be the way that this?
I'll take that from being in California, where we have been, and where Stephanie is as well, the whole West Coast. But in California is where they really started pushing, making us a trans state, making it now so that parents that will refuse to affirm their child can be taken by the state at a certain age. Um, there's no pat answer, and people are asking these questions all the time of of advocates like Erin Friday, who's out of California and has been fighting, become a real warrior. She was a mom who was, deep into this, affected in within her own family. There's no pat answer, because the thing is, it basically is lawsuits, or are lawsuits. And Stephanie well knows what's going on. I think about Camille, Stephanie, when I say that, and you're giving testimony, and Camille's testimony, the idea of what can we do in any state where you've got these laws that are just cramping down on people and families and the schools and everything. And we're hoping that these lawsuits brought by detransitioners, brought by people that feel like they were just run into, down this train of all of this, where we can see the medical harms and everything occurring, or you see the kids that are coming out of even, kindergarten classes and coming home and saying to their parents, they're the opposite sex. Of course, they use the word gender, suing, doing testimonials, everything. I would say to, was it Rebecca? Is that the name of the person that was just up there? Show up at your school board, talk to the teachers, do whatever you can, and wherever you can gather other parents together to sue the school, do it. Sue the school boards, whatever. They're doing it now with the girls, that are being forced to be in the sports with the boys. But with the detransitioners in the film like that, I would say that it's clearly got to be that way. We're in America. Money talks. People don't want to get sued. The insurance companies are already starting to change some of the things that they're doing. I don't know what else to say about that, except, yeah, lawsuits. I mean, she mentioned it.
Yeah.
That's
I think it was Billboard Chris said that as well earlier at one of our Gender 102, that he think it was him that said that's it's going to be once we get a couple of these big lawsuits go in a positive way, that it's going to help turn the tide. But I agree with you. I think money talks. When speaking of, when you and I were talking before we filmed, and about the money that's in behind this. Like, I had never heard of Martine Rothblatt and all of that
mhm.
whole background. The white men, the rich white men who are funding this. That was a real eye opener for me. I appreciated having that information in there. Okay, what is our next question we have? Why do you think these treatments were widely accepted by the medical community so quickly? Was it social media or money? Well, I guess that ties into what we were saying.
Everything. They started to change the language deliberately, and we heard in the documentary, and Stephanie well knows this, with the language and everything changing about the rules of engagement with a client, or with the student, or with, a patient. That the doctor's money, they're being told this. The American Academy of Pediatrics has literally changed words for things like, a boy no longer has a penis. You do not refer to it like that. He has an outie. I'm sorry. The last time I heard outie, that had to do with a belly button. And girls don't have vaginas anymore. We have front holes. So language, it's,
That's
yes, it's
awful.
money, social media. I mean, everything that that anonymous person just said, it was covered in the documentary. This is coming from many different angles. It's not just one thing, and it doesn't benefit just one entity. We're talking. This is why it was important for me. I wanted to stress about the producer that when she was in the midst of this, trying to figure out why her daughter wanted to be a boy, and she ran across with Jennifer Billick's work about this, as an immigrant who understood communism, it was a huge revelation to her, like, oh my God, this is huge. This has to do with the government. This has to do with media. This has to do with, oh, that's why cancel culture. It just like all falls into place.
I'd like to add that I think Julia
I
Mason does a great job. Oh, yeah, am I on? Okay. I think Julia Mason does a great job of clarifying that it's actually not been met with widespread acceptance in the medical community. She's a pediatrician, and she described what happened, how there were many pediatricians commenting on, in their board's forums that they wanted to see this get some attention. And
Mhm.
as a result, the board changed the process by which people could submit ideas. And we have Dr. William Malone speaking about things from the endocrine perspective, that there are endocrinologists who aren't on board with this. It's just that there's this like something being imposed from above that makes this chilling climate. I've experienced that as a therapist. I know lots of therapists who aren't on board with this. It's that there's some kind of power, but I think I don't want that power to be mistaken for acceptance, for widespread acceptance. I think a lot of it's just fear.
So I would like to, this is not a question submitted. This is something we had talked about previously that I'd love for you to talk to address this a little bit. You just mentioned the idea of the chilling effect in your industry. And you had said previously to me that you felt that this ideology had sort of taken advantage of therapists and there were certain vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
I think even at the end of the movie, you say that many people believe that they'll be on the right side of history, but they're going to have to reckon with this. So what are those vulnerabilities? What makes therapists so vulnerable to this ideology?
Openness, um, our flexibility, our desire to be seen as a good person, sometimes our identity being linked with that, um, our tendency to develop a sense of collusion with our patients. And if we're, working in an environment such as a blue state, or we're presenting ourselves in a certain way, that we're attracting a lot of patients who think a certain way, then we're constantly having it reinforced that this is the correct way to think about it. Then there's the fact that most therapists worked really hard to get their license. So, you have to get a bachelor's degree and then a master's degree, if not a doctorate, depending on which licensure route you go. And then you have to do all these supervised internship hours that are either not paid at all or not paid very well. Then you have to take an exam. So by the time a therapist gets their license, they've worked so hard for that. Plus, there's groupthink and peer pressure. Most therapists don't have a great like backup plan or plan B, and it's not a lucrative enough career that you can just work really hard and save up a bunch and retire early. So I think all of those are working against therapists.
Mm.
And then there's like the litigious.
Good. I
I
think
want
that
to add one thing about how the culture of therapy has changed a little bit, because when I glance at therapy textbooks from the 1980s, it's like a completely different atmosphere. Mind you, in the 80s, people were doing MDMA and couples therapy, okay, before it got like regulated in 1985. There was a lot more experimentation going on in the
wow.
field. I mean, and then if you read books from the 50s and 60s, it's much wilder than that. But even up until the 80s, our field was adventurous in its pursuit of understanding of the human psyche and family dynamics. And that has really changed with, I think, the Affordable Care Act, the shift to doing things in the medical model, the pressure to comply with insurance regulations, to comply with regulations imposed on us by people who are not psychology professionals. All of that has also contributed to the cultural shift.
I wanted to just say, Stephanie, could you say MDMA, what are you talking about, was being practiced?
Oh, I'm saying that I'm just giving an example of something that we think of as so far from what a therapist would do. I'm saying in the 1980s, it was
Mhm.
common for therapists to do MDMA, the drug, with to administer it to their patients in couples therapy. Like that, I'm not saying that I'm not trying to start a conversation about psychedelic assisted therapy right now. I'm just
Right,
saying that
right.
that is just one example of how therapists were much better at taking not better at taking they were much bigger risk takers before this kind of cultural shift to where you're always afraid of losing your
Oh,
license and you're being,
interesting.
Right.
you're getting all these overviews constantly from insurance companies that want to make sure you're documenting things properly. It's very different from how I think it felt in the 50s through the 80s in the field.
I asked because I know a lot of people didn't know what MDMA, that it was even a
Oh,
drug.
ecstasy.
There we go. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know it's crazy, huh?
That's that ties into a bit of what is addressed in the film of some of the much more extreme um, uh, therapies or activities taken, such as lobotomies, was referenced, and that seems so almost takes your breath away. That seems so extreme to think of, but in reality, it is a good equivalent. I think it's a
Mhm.
very good equivalent. It's very shocking. Um, I like the way that you talk about Joey, the importance of how language has really been kind of co-opted and manipulated, the changing of language. And then I see that also the connection, Stephanie, like you were saying, of the kindness and that openness and the social pressure. That's something I see being connected. I see it personally. I'm not saying that anyone else does, but it's just I think that we want to as society be considered nice people. And so and you there's a lot more pressure overall. That's something that I would say that I think it's not it's just not as easy. It's not like your little circle of friends that you're hanging out with. Now you post something, someone could ruin your life. I mean, I think you both have
Mhm.
had extreme experiences of that. If you say the wrong
Mhm.
thing,
There is
just
also a
be
parallel
online.
process, I think, between what it would take for a therapist who's practiced this gender affirmation approach to shift their mindset from I'm helping people to I have hurt people. It is such a humbling and remorseful experience. And so we have, sunk cost fallacy. We have a lot sort of protecting us from admitting that we were wrong. And I think there's a parallel process between those psychological hurdles in myself and my colleagues and what it takes for, someone who's detransitioning to have that shift and realize they were wrong, or for a parent who went along with it to realize they were wrong. For anyone who's going along with this, I think we need to get better at building bridges and making it easier for people to admit they were wrong. I had this idea I posted on X the other day that we should declare June Humility Month and go out in the streets with signs saying, "We are sorry. We were very wrong about gender affirming care. Please forgive us. It's okay to admit you were wrong."
Joey, I think it's amazing those protests that you highlighted are in there. I was talking to my husband about it, and we both agreed we had not heard anything about that, which is really unfortunate. But I would get behind those protests, and I'm totally supportive of Humility Month. I think it's a great idea. Okay, what's our next question we have up? For Joey, half the victims of trans procedures are autistic, as we mentioned. As an autistic person myself who almost fell into this trap, I know why autistics struggle and are vulnerable. How can I be a part of documentaries so I can say
I
what's
think
going
that
on?
name is pronounced Sven. I would say it's not so much the question, yeah, of how to be a part
That
of
looks right.
documentaries, but having conversations and going on to, first of all, documentaries are very expensive to produce. They take a long time, and there aren't, you have more of a chance of getting your story out there by contacting somebody like Stephanie, different people that are doing interviews specifically to talk about these kinds of issues and whatnot. There are tons of people that are online, and if you have some that you have found on YouTube or Rumble, um, and some other formats, I would suggest that you volunteer yourself, reach out and talk about your situation and what's of interest for you to try to get the word out, as you say.
Yeah, podcasts, small YouTube channels, Substack, X are
Mm.
much easier places to reach people. Documentaries, like Joey said, are few and far between because of the effort that goes into them. But you're welcome to contact me. I'm highly Googleable if you're interested in sharing your story on my show.
Googleable. I like that word. Yeah, and I agree with you. I think that both of you highlight some really important points there. The is full of some great great
authors and content creators. I'm so thankful for all of the different channels and outlets that we have to be able to share stories like this. Okay, I have another question I wanted to ask. This is from a little bit earlier, or from the film specifically. I'm curious about the way that we talk or you talk about the co-opting of the gay rights movement. I think that terminology
Mhm.
was used a little bit in there. And then there's a really bold statement of I don't think it's wrong. I think it's very interesting that it's so boldly stated
Mhm.
of transing the gay away. So Joey, you shared some odd experiences you had
Mhm.
had with a guy handing out tea or testosterone to you and your friends, and it just feels so extreme to me, but it does make me wonder, does this seem intentional? Is there an agenda
I
behind
think
this?
there is. I mean, when I walked away from that later, it took me a while to kind of get that because it seemed to me at the time, I mean, here was some guy dressed very nicely and handing out for free in pill form some street grade testosterone. And immediately I thought about inner city black community first getting crack cocaine for free, and then it was $5, and then it was raised, and what happened to so many black communities in metropolitan areas that where they were just wiped out. I mean, just like we're seeing happening with fentanyl now, but there was a very specific targeted audience for crack cocaine, and they weren't trying to give gay men or straight people testosterone on the streets, like that. That was a very specific targeted coming to where there was these pop-up lesbian bars. And I only ever spoke with one other woman who was willing to talk to me for a while, and then she disappeared. I've always been trying to track down people that experienced the same thing that I did, whether it was New York City. I heard that it happened there. I know it happened in Los Angeles, but there isn't anybody else that I've heard talk about it in any regularity at all. I've just heard women say, "Oh yeah, I know. I had a friend that did that," or this or that. So if there's anybody that sees this video, you can contact me as well, and I'd love to explore that some more. But yeah, I think it's deliberate. It's like some of the stuff that we brought up. Again, going back to Jennifer Billick, there's no way that this hasn't been a planned thing coming from big pharma. And something that's been being talked about on X lately, and ended up in these conversations, it wasn't until 1997 that big pharma was able to advertise on TV. And since that, what did we've seen that Viagra came
Oh,
out, I mean, there were tons of testosterone ads and things like that a while ago for men, with the problem of being able to get an erection, and people used to joke about it and stuff. And I thought, why are we seeing all these ads all of a sudden? But if you watch cable TV at all, you're going to see a number of platforms that's almost exclusively what they'll show in a commercial break are all big pharma ads. And then you see the disclaimers,
yeah,
where you can go blind, you can hurt your liver, all that stuff gets spoken
you can die.
so quickly you can barely understand what the person's saying. But yes, I believe that it's absolutely deliberate, as was anorexia years ago. I think that there have been a lot of social plagues upon us that somebody is profiting off of. Many times, it is big pharma.
And I think I want to just give another applause for the film and how interestingly I think that it ties the connections, that it starts with the idea of the trans movement and the medicalization of our generation, or this generation. But the future, what that looks like is then when they change their mind, or if they want to have children, and then having a whole nother market of medicalization there in the fertilization industry. That was something that I just want to call that out, as I there's so many pieces that are connected, and the domino effect, right? That one thing affects something else. And it's
Mhm.
just, that was something that had never occurred to me prior to seeing the film. And it was kind of horrific and very sad. to think of as well, because we are seeing a real drop in fertility as well.
And I'd like to
Okay,
add something in there
go
quickly
ahead.
is that remember that most of this movie, the interviews that you saw and everything, were shot starting in early 2022. So we're already 3 years from when you see Sasha and Lisa Marciano and these people being interviewed. This was like March, yeah, of 2022, and that we got it as updated as we did. I mean, it was a pretty quick turnaround when you think about, again, all the things that we brought up. But when Jamie Reed came out with her whistleblowing, we actually had another ending. And I was all ready for that. And it was the thing that I had most wanted and really fought for. And that was going to be a statement that made it very clear that there's no such thing as trans or non binary or any of these other identities. And then Jamie Reed came out with her statement, and that was the timely thing to do. So that was as updated as 2023, right before the film came out. Can you flesh out the idea that there's no special class of people called trans? Flash it out. And the importance in our language to not reinforce this belief system by calling them trans people, trans women, etc. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much. That was, for me, that was one of the main driving things that I wanted the film to state, and it really never does. Um, the whole idea of this third kind of human, sexed human, again goes back to Jennifer Billick's work. This is a created identity crisis. This has never been about, I'd said earlier, this has never really been about sexual orientation. I believe this is all about controlling people and getting an entire generation, at least one generation, so confused so that sterilization would be easier to take place. I could theorize about this stuff a lot, but basically, if we keep using language like trans people and it goes to this trans child, that language validates that that is something that is a reality, and it's not a reality. I think that we need to speak as much as we can. And of course, when like the position that Stephanie is in with having to do therapy with people, what I'm talking about is from me and from a lot of what a lot of us call ourselves as living in a pro reality place, that it's really important that if you're talking about a man who's pretending to be a woman, that you literally can say that. And when the clearer that we can be and say something and not use the pronouns, because the pronouns, that's a gateway for everything else to start changing. And
Joey,
that, yeah.
can I add something here? It's so interesting in my line of work talking to parents all day and hearing how they describe their kids because I talk to people at various points along the way. Most people I talk to are like me, they use biological sex based pronouns. Um, but a lot of them have compromised and gotten in the habit of calling their kid they or something like that. And it's so interesting noticing what comes up for people when they're using that language versus when they start to shift back to calling their daughter she. A lot of emotion comes out, and so what we notice is that the they and the false pronouns have this way of sort of shrouding the person, distancing and shielding them. And that's why in my course I use the analogy of the butterfly emerging from the chrysalis, because I do think in adolescence that there is a need to put a wall up and go inward and rediscover yourself, but this is like a really sick consequential way of doing that. So it has this distancing, obscuring effect when we use this language. And when I've talked to parents who have affirmed, who have gone down that path and then regretted it as their kid is starting to see the medical impacts, and when I've talked to therapists who have affirmed, who have gone down that path and regretted it when they see what happens to their patients, and when we talk about this person who has medicalized, who has started to look like the opposite sex, especially for females, because, testosterone on females is different than estrogen in males,
Mhm.
especially the girls, and you start to see this person as just a young woman. This balding, bearded, deep voiced person is just a vulnerable young woman and you see her for who she is, it brings up so much emotion for people because it's like, oh my God, what have I done? The problems that that girl was struggling with that she sought testosterone as the solution to are really no different than the problems any of us have struggled with. Yes, her sexed body may have been the scapegoat, but that doesn't mean that her pain and her human struggles were any different than the pain and human struggles that any of us have had. And when we really tap into that, there's a huge amount of compassion and a huge amount of remorse that comes up.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for addressing that. I think that language is so important, and having empathy. I think that's something that actually, I know I'm probably missing a number of quite a bit that was stated, but one of the things that I thought was very interesting that I've heard from a number of different places is the we try to affirm, we believe that, or people in the person's life are trying to affirm and support that person, but in reality, and that the person who's questioning so often would like someone to push back. But that's hard. That's hard to do when you're trying to preserve a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
That's such a challenging point. Stephanie, were you able to talk about your RGD repair course at all? Wanted to make sure
I've
we get
mentioned
gave
that
you
it
a chance to talk about
exists. I can just briefly mention that this is, a few years ago, I started working with parents on this issue, and then about a year ago, I stopped. I wrapped up my therapy practice. I had to choose how I spent my time. I was pretty sick, and I had a lot going on, and so I chose to exclusively focus on this parent coaching aspect of what I've been doing the last few years. And as my health started to recover, I finally put all of the common themes, all the lessons that have been valuable to multiple families, I turned them into a series of videos, which eventually became the ROGD repair course. So, for the parents who are here looking for help because of your trans identified child, that's definitely a resource that's available for you. One thing I've noticed with talking to these families is that many of them have done a lot of research. They've watched our film and they've read every Gen Spec publication and every book, and they listen to every podcast. But that doesn't necessarily leave people feeling better equipped to talk to their kid. And in fact, um, oftentimes showing your kid a film like ours will backfire depending on the kid's mindset, your motivations for showing the film, how you're talking about it, all that kind of stuff, which is why I really appreciated Missy at the very beginning of this, how you made this point that, sensitive conversation and the way we talk about it here amongst those of us who are already concerned about this isn't necessarily the same way that we would present that information to someone who's indoctrinated, right? So my course really focuses on the psychological aspect and how people can communicate with people in this state.
And Joey, I know you have some friends who are, or you have some colleagues maybe that are have other programs. In the meantime, as we're signing off, can you guys both give any final thoughts or statements you want to, tips, advice, things to keep in mind and encourage parents, and then where people can follow you?
Let's say quickly for me, there's a program called Affirming Reality. A woman named Gabriella Clark has been working with parents about issues of looking into helping to get their kids out of what is really important is that she uses this language. It's great that it's a cult. It really is a cult, and a lot of people don't want to hear that right away. They have to be brought in, and larger issues of what's going on in society and things like that have to happen. But because there's such a silencing of this, and you're not supposed to ask any questions, and it has all of the forbearing of a religion, in a way, is that anybody that is willing to talk about this as a cult, I think it's a good thing. There are resources. I know you're going to be putting up links, I think, with this later on. Isn't that accurate? And, yeah, and it's a good place. I think that when I found out about Stephanie, because I didn't learn about Stephanie except through my producer, and then I was like, finally, there's somebody, who is rejecting this. Because again, living in California, and I know a lot of psychotherapists and marriage family counselors, and the people that I was talking to were getting really frustrated and saying they were so glad they were going to retire. And I'm talking about around 2014, 15, and 16. A male therapists that I knew and 3 women that I knew, and they were all in their late 50s. And they were like so happy. They said they didn't want to go along with this stuff at all. And it was just being, shoved at them. So yeah, any resources I would say it'd be great for people to contact Stephanie. And yeah, I'll give you some other links later.
Stephanie, did you get a chance to share all your socials? I know we talked a little bit about it.
Oh, sure. I'm trying to spend less time on social media. My X account has been private for several months now, which has done a lot for my stress level. But I am on X at some therapist, and you can request to follow me. And if I like your bio, I will approve that request. And if you say anything mean, I will block you. So that's me on social media. But I do have resources for parents. It's a very comprehensive program, like over 120 lessons. That's at rogdrepair.com. My consulting services are at stephaniewinn.com. My podcast is at sometherapist.com. I am, like I said, highly Googleable, so I'm sure people can find a way to get in touch if they want to.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both so much. Again, I really appreciate you coming tonight and joining us and helping me as I traverse the challenges of technology thanks to weather. So it's been great. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much
and
for
I wish
having
you
us,
the very
Missy.
best.
Thank you so much.
Have a good night. So thank you all as well, our friends and family, Joyful Warriors, and other viewers. We really appreciate you joining tonight. I apologize again for all the technical difficulties I had tonight. Unfortunately, the weather just really decided to knock me out and made this very challenging. Please, please share this with your friends. This movie is so important. When you go to the website, you'll see that there was supposed to be a launch. I meant to mention that earlier. There's supposed to be a launch in AMC, and it actually got canceled in theaters across the country because it has such important information in it. So please share this with your friends and family. It is so important. As a teaser coming up, we are next month going to be focusing on comprehensive sexuality education. Gender ideology has been a wild ride. It was my red pill. It's super interesting to learn more about these. We had Gender 101 with our 3 lectures from Logan Lansing, Colin Wright, and Mia Hughes. You can go back and catch the recording on the Moms for Liberty YouTube channel. We had Gender 102 with Billboard Chris and Jay Richards right after Billboard Chris got back from Australia. So that was fantastic. Last week, we had our book club discussion with Ryan Anderson on When Harry Became Sally, and that was absolutely fantastic. Again, all of these recordings are available on the Moms for Liberty channel. And I've got the old picture there that doesn't have our wonderful film that we just finished up today. But next month, like I said, CSE, you are not going to want to miss this. We have so many good speakers for you that are going to be supporting and helping you learn more about this topic. First of all, Wednesday, May 7th, in-studio event in Brentwood, Tennessee. Come and see us. You can get tickets. It's very limited, but it's a wonderful little studio. So again, that's Wednesday, May 7th is CSE 101. We have some amazing speakers, Aaron Brewer, Monica Klein, we've got and Rebecca Ose from CFAM. We have a number of just really fantastic speakers. It's going to be awesome. Then the next week on Wednesday, May 14th is CSE 102. That's featuring Seth Gruber and Kelly Shankowski. On the third week, we're going to switch it up and we'll have the watch party with Family International's film called The War on Children. This is not the same film that was put on by Starbucks. This is a different film. It's very, very incredible. And we'll have our Audrey Werner, who is just the absolute expert on CSE, along with Sharon Slater, the producer of the film from Family Watch International. And then finally, we'll be wrapping up in May with our book club featuring Dr. Miriam Grossman's book, You're Teaching My Children What? And you're not going to want to miss that. That book, if you haven't read it, I'm telling you, get it. It is incredible. It is very easy to get through. We'll give you warning that there's some pretty shocking language in it, but it's very easy to read, and she presents it so well. So far, we've had a great semester. We've gotten so much done and had some really incredible topics. You can go onto the m4lu.org website to see everything in our resource library for previous months. And then finally, as was famously said by James Madison, the advancement and diffusion of knowledge is the only true guardian of liberty. And that is the mission for M4LU and why we are here. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.